Hi guys, it's Sophie. So I'm going to be talking through the books I read in August today, and it doesn't feel like I've read that much. I think I've read quite a lot actually. When I picked them all up it looked like more than it was in my head, but it's mostly been non-fiction. So I'm going to go through the fiction first and then I'll go back to non-fiction again at the end. The first one I have is Andre Aciman's Find Me. I received this one for review, and this is the sequel to Call Me By Your Name. And I was really disappointed with this, unfortunately. I loved the first half. I thought it was really good, really interesting, but I just didn't think it was that great and I was quite disappointed. I think other people have been quite disappointed too, looking at Goodreads reviews. It just felt like it kind of meandered a little bit and didn't feel like a coherent single storyline. Yeah, so unfortunately I wouldn't recommend. And then the only other fiction I read this month was one I just finished, which is Water Shall Refuse Them by Lucie, McKnight Hardy, and this is one that's been going around loads this summer, and it's sort of it's sort of like a summer gothic horror novel, so all kind of suspense, lots of suspense, about a family who go on holiday to this rural village in Wales, and they have lost one of their younger daughters, so they still have two children, and it's a husband and wife and the two children who are left. The girl is 16 and the boy is only 4, and it's talking about them kind of exploring their grief, and the main character is the young girl, so it's sort of a coming of age story as well, and it is witchy and heat wave feeling, and yeah, I just really enjoyed it. It's set in the 70s, though it felt quite timeless. I felt like it didn't, to me it didn't feel like it was overly important it was in the 70s, other than the fact they didn't have mobile phones, which I think led to the kind of isolation feeling. I really liked it actually. I gave it 4 stars in the end. And the first non-fiction I have to talk about is I'll Tell You in Person, which is a collection of essays by Caldwell, and these just felt nice and friendly and interesting. It felt like you were just talking to someone you knew and exploring their life. I picked it up because it is one of the essays in there particularly is talking about bisexuality and the kind of confusion of feelings that she's having around that. I did really enjoy these when I was reading them, but I would say there's only probably a couple of essays that stand out to me afterwards. I did read it quite quickly, and maybe because of that chatty feeling it didn't feel as hard-hitting as some others I've read, but I still really liked it. I'd still definitely read more of what she's written. I have read her novel, which is talking about a girl who's having her first relationship with another woman, and I really enjoyed that. So I like her writing a lot. I just didn't think that the singular essays all stood out to me, just a few of them kind of stayed with me afterwards. And the next one that I picked up was Trick Mirror by Tolentino, and she's a staff writer I think for the New Yorker. Is it the New Yorker? Yeah. And these are just essays talking about a variety of things from modern life. I would say kind of similar to I'll Tell You in Person. Some of these essays stuck with me and some of them didn't. So there was one about marriage culture, which really stood out to me and made me think a lot. And then there's ones about when she went on a reality TV show. But I don't think that I enjoyed this as much as I thought I would, because the praise was so high from people I really liked. Rebecca Solnit and Zadie Smith both sung the praises of this book, and I just didn't like it as much as I was hoping to on the back of those recommendations. As I say, there were some essays in that made me think a lot. The one talking about marriage and the marriage industry, and the kind of parallel between having the day of the wedding being all about the woman and then the marriage itself being something that tends to be a bad thing for women. It's statistically, if you looked at health outcomes and happiness levels, and I found that one really interesting. But again, not all of them. There were some that I just didn't really care about all that much. More the ones talking around her using drugs didn't really interest me. It's not that that doesn't interest me sometimes, but just that didn't click with me. The essays didn't all stand out. So yeah, I think some of them are good, but I didn't like them overall that much. The next one that I read I really liked, and that was Invisible Women: Exposing Data Bias in a World Designed for Men by Criado, Perez, and this is just talking about all of the different ways that the world is designed and the problems with the way it's designed and what the outcomes are, from little annoying things like the size of phones that don't fit in girls' hands or lack of pockets, through to things like the lack of safety measures taken to ensure women don't get injured when they're in the driver's seat of cars, to medicines not being tested in conjunction with like a female body, and I just thought it was really funny and just really interesting, and so many facts, but it didn't feel heavy at all. It felt like her tone was very amusing. I read a lot of quotes out to Tom as I was reading it, and I would really recommend it. I think this sounds quite dry, but it isn't dry at all, and yeah, I really enjoyed the process of reading it. And the next one I read was The Heartland, Finding and Losing Schizophrenia by Nathan Filer. This is telling stories of different people who have schizophrenia and what their lives look like. Nathan Filer wrote The Shock of the Fall, which was a fictionalised telling of a man who had schizophrenia, and he worked as a mental health nurse. So this is non-fiction talking about people with schizophrenia and kind of like the journey that those people go on, though quite unusually, which I don't know that I'm a fan of, but he doesn't sort of agree with the idea of labelling things mental illness or giving things diagnoses. So he kind of calls things like so-called schizophrenia or somewhat known as bipolar or whatever, which I don't really agree with, but I found it quite interesting. Yeah, and again, I read this one really quickly, and I think I preferred the collected schizophrenias when I'm thinking about what it's like to be in that headspace, if that's what you're looking for, but I still enjoyed reading this one, and I thought it was interesting to hear from the perspective of someone who was helping people with these conditions. And the next one that I read was Don't Touch My Hair by Emma Dabiri, and this was really interesting. This is a lot of stuff I knew nothing about. I do think I wasn't like the target audience for this, in that there's a lot of information here that I really didn't know anything about at all, or I'd not already heard about, and I had to do a lot of like googling and looking things up, and that's fine. But it was good. This book goes into like the intricacies of black women and black men's hair, their hairstyles, where it comes from, what the history of the hair like is, different patterns that people make, the kind of communications it was, elements about how people were like judged by the like texture of their hair or the like colour of their hair, and just kind of like all the complexities that go into hair. So it was definitely more of a deep dive specifically on hair than I was expecting. I did enjoy reading it. I think I learned a lot. And the next one that I read was No One Is Too Small to Make a Difference by Greta Thurnberg. This is a collection of some of her like talks that she's done all around the world. I would say that, I think this is her fault, I think it's just because of the talks. There's a lot that she's saying again and again, which happens when you read like a collection of talks, because if the problem hasn't changed, you're still going to keep saying the same things. But it meant sort of by the time you got to the end, you'd read a lot of it already. But I still liked the process of reading them. And I did read them in one go, so I guess maybe if you're reading one and then leaving it a week or something, but it's so small, I think it kind of asks to be read in one go. Yeah, I think probably if you've read one or watched one, you don't need to read the others, but I quite enjoyed the process of doing that anyway. And yeah, I think it was really cool. And another one on climate change, this one is The Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace-Wells. This is talking about like what will happen to the planet and what's already happening to the planet as a result of climate change. I think I actually really liked the process of reading this. It was quite relentless when I was going through. It's very sad and it feels very like inevitable when I was reading it, and that was quite depressing, but I still thought it was interesting to read about it because I feel like the outcome is something that I've not necessarily sat down and read about before, so it was good to do that. But what I would say that's kind of like skewed my feelings about the book since, because I really enjoyed the process of reading it, is that I've since found out that lots of people who actually work in these areas and like predicting what might happen have said that they like the ideas he's putting forward, but that the actual science is really weak. So that puts me off the book a little bit, and it makes me a little bit tentative to recommend it, because I don't want to be recommending stuff if other people are saying that it might not necessarily be realistic. So yeah, there's kind of that. I enjoyed it a lot, but I've now got a pinch of salt with it in thinking about this one. And then the very last one I have is Superior, The Return of Race Science by Angelina Saini. And I really enjoyed reading this one. I thought this one was sort of talking about racism in terms of how it's been played off as a science, going back through history and going into today, and kind of like arguing with the idea that race is a thing at all, and that the idea that you can measure things based on race is kind of pointless and racist as an assumption, and talking about all kinds of things like where the idea of races came from, who put those forward, how they change over time, how the stories that science could tell about race can fuel racism in different countries, by creating like myths around what could be some science at the base of something. I don't think the journey that it went through was surprising to me. I thought this would be broadly kind of what I'd expect to have happened, but I still really like reading about it. It's not something I'd read about before, and especially I think like how a scientist could come up with an idea, and then even if the idea itself wasn't meant to be racist, or the person who thought something up didn't mean for it to be taken that way at all, that when you examine it, it could be racist, or that people then grab hold of it and use it to fuel like racist ideas. Yeah, and it was just good. It was interesting, and this is definitely an enjoyable one if you are interested in that subject. So those are all the books I read. My throat is really sore. We just went to Pride this morning. I've done a lot of shouting, so it might just be that my voice is a bit tired from that. So sorry if I had to stop several times to try and like catch myself from coughing when I've been filming this. I hope you guys have enjoyed seeing what I've read in August, and yeah, hopefully it's nice to have another bookish video. I know I haven't done one in a while, and sorry I missed last week's. We were painting and it was all just a bit manic. Yes, it's nice to see you again, and I'll see you guys again soon in another video. Bye!